and I need to wait a second for some people to come in here. All right, well, hello everyone, and welcome to another Third Place Books event live on Zoom. My name is Kalani. I work on the events team with Third Place Books. For those of you who might not be familiar with us or who might be watching this from around the country, Third Place Books is an independent bookstore with 3 locations in the Seattle area, and we love having author events. We are so grateful to have this virtual platform where we can connect authors with our readers. So thank you so much for supporting this event and watching tonight. We would further love it and really appreciate your support if you can make sure to purchase our authors' books from our website at thirdplacebooks.com. I will be sharing the links of where you can buy those books over in the chat throughout this event. So I please encourage you to do so. I am happy to report that we do have plenty of copies in stock and we are shipping across the US. And also happy to report that you can in fact pick up at any of our 3 locations in the Seattle area. Our stores are open for browsing now from 9 to 5. So our stores at Ravenna, Seward Park, and Lake Forest Park are open for browsing, and you can pick up your copies of these books by both of our authors tonight. Also happy to report that we do have a limited supply of signed copies of She Will Rise. Katie Hill was able to come into the store a couple weeks ago and sign our stock. So thank you. Please make sure to support our authors and buy these with us.
Yes, please.
Yes. While you are on our website, we would further love it if you take a look around, make sure to browse our events calendar. We have been keeping very busy with a lot of our event programming with events from all across the literary spectrum. We've had some mystery authors, journalists, novelists, podcasters, really all across the board. And looking at our October calendar, it is fully loaded with a lot of different events. So you will definitely find something worth watching. So please take a look at the event calendar and follow us on our social media accounts at Third Place Books to stay in tune with what we are doing. Towards the end of our event, we will be ending our portion of the event with an audience Q&A. So we'd love it if you stay engaged with this event tonight and make sure to ask our authors a question over in the Q&A function below. Please don't use the chat. We would love it if you funnel your questions that direction. I also want everyone watching tonight to please be mindful of the Third Place Books events code of conduct. You should have already seen it when you registered for this event, but I do want to reiterate, by registering for this event, you are agreeing to refrain from engaging in inappropriate behavior and harassment of any kind throughout the course of this event. Any participants who engage in inappropriate behavior or harassment of any kind will be immediately ejected from this event. And I will say it is extremely easy to boot someone from the event. I actually booted myself from an event very recently, so we will have to do that if need be. So our main event tonight, I'm very excited to be hosting this virtual event for author Katie Hill. This is a rescheduled event that was going to originally happen back on September 10th. And so we are very thankful to our authors and audience alike for sticking with us as we rescheduled this event during this very hectic time for everyone. So thank you again. Katie Hill was not yet 30 when she embarked on her run for Congress. By 31, she had become not only a member of Congress, but a member of congressional leadership and was subject to an HBO docuseries entitled She's Running. She was the first woman to hold the seat and first openly LGBTQ woman to be elected to Congress from California. She resigned from her position following a scandal that began a national conversation around questions of bisexuality, domestic abuse, cyber exploitation, workplace power dynamics, and what happens when regular people who live regular lives run for office. Tonight, Katie is celebrating the recent release of her book, She Will Rise, Becoming a Warrior in the Battle for True Equality. Publishers Weekly reviewed the book saying, quote, "This unvarnished account turns a devastating setback into a powerful argument for change." And as a very special treat tonight, former Katie is joined in conversation with Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal. Congresswoman Jayapal has joined Third Place Books on a number of events, and we very much thank her for her continued support of Seattle independent bookstores. Congresswoman Jayapal represents the Washington 7th District, which encompasses most of the Seattle and surrounding areas. The first Indian American woman in the House of Representatives, Congresswoman Jayapal has spent nearly 30 years working internationally and domestically as an advocate for women's, immigrants, civil and human rights. She is the author of Use the Power You Have and lives here in Seattle, Washington. So with that, I will be hiding myself and muting myself, and please take it away, former Congresswoman Katie Hill and Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal.
Thank you so much. That is a great introduction to Third Place Books, which, as you heard, I'm a huge fan of independent booksellers, and Seattle is, Katie, just so you know this, Seattle is one of the places, maybe the place still, that has the highest ratio of independent booksellers per capita. So
that's good to know.
So Third Place is really important in that landscape, and I'm so proud to represent many of the areas where there's a Third Place Books. So thank you so much, Third Place Books. And Katie Hill, it is absolutely fabulous to be able to do this with you. I have read your book, and I just hope that everybody will buy it because I think it is such an important story of many of the issues that we women face in Congress, but also that women across our country, across the world, frankly, face in gaining equality. And just as a little bit of introduction, I'm so excited to be able to introduce you to my district. First of all, I know this is virtual, so there may be people from all over, but just so people know, when Katie was running for office, I went out and campaigned for her. Mm-hmm. And I don't do that lightly. I only do that for candidates who really, I believe, are representing and forwarding the values that the 7th District believes in and that I was elected for, bold progressive values. And you know, people who are willing to stand up for what they believe in and have a track record of doing that. And that's what I saw in you, Katie, was really somebody who had a phenomenal career in a relatively short period of time, running a nonprofit, which was very, very near and dear to my heart. In fact, the nonprofit that you ran was called PATH, which remind me of the acronym. It was
People Assisting the Homeless.
People Assisting the Homeless. I actually worked for an organization called PATH, a nonprofit, as well. It was Program for Appropriate Technology and Health, which is based in Seattle, that works on global reproductive health for women and children. And I was just so impressed with what I saw when I came to your district. You connected deeply with people who were there. You were very real and authentic, something I think we see too little of in politics. You were relevant to the issues that people had, and you flipped a district that had been a Republican district, and unfortunately went back to being a Republican district after you left Congress, because I think people really trusted who you were and what you were about. And you were unapologetic about running on Medicare for all, which is a huge priority of mine, but also on paid family leave, on a $15 minimum wage, so many other things. And so I just want people to understand who are watching what a groundbreaking candidate you were, what a groundbreaking congresswoman you were, and what a groundbreaking activist you will continue to be as you go forward. So
that means so much. Thank you so much.
So I wanted to start by just asking you the very basic question of why you decided to write this book, and tell us a little bit about what led you to write it and what you want people to get out of it.
Sure. Well, once I resigned, there were, effectively two options. I could go away. I could, take my time, recover, go back into the field of social services where, opportunities are obviously still there. Or I could continue to use my story to hopefully benefit others and to create real change. And I knew, and I said this in my resignation speech, that I wasn't going to go quietly. And that I was going to continue to advocate on behalf of the issues that mattered so much to me before, and do even more so now. So but what does that look like? And also I had to process my own experience and the trauma that's associated with it, coming out of an abusive marriage, the tumultuous divorce, the cyber exploitation, and the ultimate decision to resign. And I knew that I needed to find a way of doing that would work for me. And I happened to write to do that on my own anyway. And so when someone finally approached me about, would you be open to writing about this for your next stage and what you're going to do with your next stage? And I decided that was a good way for me to hopefully use my story in a positive way. And I'm really glad that I did.
There's a lot of pain in your book. There's a number of incidents that you talk about from when you were a child and dealt with sexual abuse to later in life, similar incident that happened to you in France. And there's a woman that features throughout many of the chapters. You start many of the chapters with a woman named Sarah. And we don't really find out until the last chapter where you talk about Sarah's story that Sarah was actually your grandmother. And I wanted to ask you if you could talk a little bit about those elements of pain and why you shared such personal stories. People ask me this all the time because as a Congress member, I've shared a number of different things that are very, very personal, including my abortion, including, being a mom, very, very proud mom of a non-binary kid. And I think that there's something very, very important about members of Congress sharing these very personal experiences that actually humanize us for the rest of the country and make it possible for people to connect with us. Can you talk a little bit about some of those incidents and why you chose to share them and why you think that was important?
Yeah. I mean, I operate under the exact same philosophy as you. And I think that what I experienced during the campaign was that, I decided from the very beginning that, I hadn't spent my whole life trying to become a politician. I was in it for advocacy and for social change. And I wasn't running as somebody that I wasn't, right? So I felt like I wanted to just be me and to share my experiences as I'd had them and my beliefs and so on and so forth. But as I did, I just heard over and over again from people who were like, it's so amazing to hear you talk about this because it's happened to me and no one ever talks about it, whether it's childhood sexual trauma or, domestic abuse or, the different ways that can show up and the psychological impact any of it can have on us in the long run. I think so much of that is just simply kind of, about it, you might be compassionate toward, or empathetic towards it, but we don't acknowledge that 1 in 3 women will be sexually assaulted in her lifetime. I mean, the numbers are staggering. And so being vocal about it, saying this did happen to me and we need to do things to change it so it doesn't keep happening to women or whatever the experience might be, it shows people that they're not alone. And that's the way that we call attention to it and actually make a difference.
So talk to us a little bit about that. You have a chapter, you have, the way the book is organized, there's a set of chapters towards the end that are about the battles and kind of you articulate those battles in very specific ways. I think it's money, workplace, bodies, safety, and at home. But kind of threaded throughout the book is this experience of domestic violence and what that experience entails or what that term entails. It's an area that I've worked on for a long time, and for people who are in the Seattle area, was on the founding board, one of the founding board members of an organization called CHAYA that works on domestic violence within South Asian American communities and have continued to do that. In fact, you quote the National Network of Domestic, I think it's National Network of Against Domestic Violence in your book as resources. Can you just talk about the components of domestic violence that you articulate in the book, and how women, I think there's sometimes a myth that if you're a powerful woman, maybe even a congresswoman, that you don't experience this. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So when I got into the relationship with my ex-husband, I was only 16 years old. He was older than I was. And, you know, I was coming out of kind of these multiple sexual traumas when I was younger. And so there's a lot, you know, that's wrapped up in how I got into that relationship in the first place. But it's sort of like being, you know, a crab is cooked in boiling water. It doesn't, you know, I don't know whatever that metaphor is, but it doesn't notice it while it's happening. And often until you're in hindsight, then you're unaware of the abuse that's actually occurring. And that was the case for me. I knew it was getting worse and worse, but I also, like so many other women just across the board, whatever kind of position of power they are or aren't in, there were so many things holding you back, saying that, you know, I don't want people to know about this. I don't want people to think I'm weak. What about my family? What about my home? What about, you know, the perception? What about the finances? All of these different considerations that it ultimately, and pets and kids and everything else that keeps people in. But as far as the different kinds of components of abuse, they can be so wide ranging, from physical to gaslighting to you know, to financial, to you know, manipulation, and to controlling who your friends are, who you talk to. And so I guess with the chapter, I really wanted to try and lay it out in, you know, clear as possible examples, so that people can recognize it in their own relationships or in the relationships of people that they care about, so that they can hopefully say something, and it doesn't take as long as it did for me.
Thank you. I think you really did that. I want to talk a little bit about something that you call shadow sexism, and ask you to talk about what that means to you, what you mean by that term. You spend a fair amount of a chapter talking about it, and I think it's a really important concept.
So a few decades ago, a woman could get fired just because she's pregnant, or because she's, you know, straight up someone, an employer could say, we're firing you because you're pregnant, and or we're paying you less because you're a woman. They could just say it outright. But now it's not quite that obvious always, but it's things like how you know, women are paid less from the very beginning, from the very time that they graduate college and in their entry-level careers. They're paid less. They don't get as good of interest rates when they are on loans, or when they're applying for loans on their own.
That was a statistic I didn't know. You talked about in the book how women pay more for their credit cards.
Yeah.
Credit card interest rates.
I know, isn't that wild? And you know, these are things that are still going on. There's the kinds of you know, the kinds of positions that women are welcomed into, and the perception about how family and women being able to balance work and family. And when women are mothers and are apparent mothers, like that's part of their life, and that's therefore there's expectations within their career that they be able to be flexible, etc. They're punished financially for it. But when men are parents, then even, you know, regardless of how much they're showing up, they're rewarded financially for it. So that's kind of why I call it shadow sexism, because it's not quite as glaring as it used to be, but it's still very much there, lingering.
There are a couple of other statistics that you talk about in the book that, you know, I knew sort of intuitively, but I think when I saw the polling that you presented, I was just reminded again of how far we have not come.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes
right?
we talk about how far we have come, and we certainly have, and we're going to get to current politics and Ruth Bader Ginsburg and the Supreme Court a little bit later. But before we get there, I want to quote two things that you talk about in the book. One is a Gallup survey from 2019 that showed that heterosexual couples between the ages of 18 and 34 were no more likely to divide chores equitably than older couples.
I know.
Oh my God.
Like
And
that
then
one, I was just
and then the second one was more high school seniors today prefer a family arrangement with the man as the breadwinner and the woman as the homemaker. There's nothing wrong with either of those characterizations. The question really comes down to the stereotypes
Yep.
of men or women in those particular professions.
Totally.
From the get-go. So just tell us a little bit about what you think in terms of why, even with the current generation, we're seeing these kinds of enormous divides, and what you think it will take to change that.
Yeah. Well, honestly, I was shocked by those statistics too. I thought that, we're so much more progressive. Millennials and Gen Z are so much more progressive than our parents were. And, we're gender equity is just kind of considered what part of what we expect now. So when I saw those, my jaw like hit the floor because, there's not an easy explanation for it. I don't know why it is that, more people now prefer and, when we say more people, like, we don't know who's answering that exactly, right? It could be that there hasn't been any change it could be like not really factoring in or showing the difference between urban and rural areas or diverse ones versus white ones. And so we'd need more data to unpack that one fully. But the lack of division of chores and caretaking responsibilities, I see that play out in relationship after relationship. And I think we are just so socialized that we pick things up and we pick up expectations. And I think it's going to take a really conscious effort for us to kind of break out of these traditions and patterns and norms of what roles are expected of anyone because of their gender.
Well, so you also talk about that quite a bit, feminine and masculine traits, what's assigned to those traits, and what women have to endure. And you have a phrase in the book where you say, it resonated for me. It said, it's hard not to question ourselves, at least sometimes. And I think that that's very, very true for so many of us that are dealing with all of these stereotypes and the questions about what you look like. I thought it was interesting. You started one of your chapters talking about how long you have to spend to get ready. What do you wear? What do you do with your hair? How do you make sure that you look the part?
Right.
And maybe you could just talk about that a little bit, because I think about that all the time. I'm one of those people that does not like to wear makeup, does not like to wear high heels.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting to watch all of the things that we either are forced to do, and it's fine, whatever you want to do is fine, but you should have the choice.
Right. Yeah. And so one of the things that I point out is that, I think there's a bit of a tension, and I even feel this within myself. Like, if I want to break these standards, why am I doing it? Why am I conforming to this? Why am I wearing makeup? Why am I wearing high heels? Why am I spending this time getting ready? But there are these, we are consistently reinforced in the way that we're perceived based on, and what kind of reactions we get, based on how we look. And there's studies that have shown that that basically how well groomed women are, then, whether it looks like they've put on some makeup or done their nails or done their hair, that they get paid more over the course of time. Like they get paid significantly more than women who don't. And that's not right. There's nothing that's right about that, but it's true. And if you're trying to kind of navigate your way in the world, even subconsciously, you're picking up on that. You're like, oh, people treat, I remember as a server, that was the job that I had when I was in college. And you knew very well, you get tipped more if you wear makeup than if you don't. And I think that's, I knew if I were going to campaign events, like, I just know what the reaction is going to be that when you appear a certain way versus when you don't. And so I think that's one piece of it. The other is, I don't know. I just think that it really comes down to this kind of internalized set of expectations that it's going to take a long time for us to break free of. So, I do try now and I did this even when I was in Congress, to like do videos without me wearing makeup. And hopefully we'll be able to kind of change the standards in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, the statistic you quote is that women who are, quote, well-groomed spend time and money on hair, makeup, and manicures make as much as 20% more than women who aren't. And you talk about the unfairness of that because of the time it takes, the money it costs, and the bullshit factor, of not necessarily doing something if you don't want to do it. If you do, great, fabulous, wonderful. But I think that that's a catch-22 that a lot of women are in.
Yeah.
You talk about these key battles, and I wanted to give you a chance to just quickly describe those kind of 5 key battles that you outline in the book, and maybe touch on a couple of the policies that you think really address those battles.
Sure. Well, one of the biggest ones is the battle for money, and that comes in a number of different ways. It comes from the most obvious in ensuring that women are actually paid equally, but it's not just about equal pay, saying that we can't discriminate on women, or we can't discriminate on pay based on somebody's gender or sexual identity. But we also know that women do take on a heavier burden of caretaking responsibilities, and so paid family leave has to go along with it if you want to actually make it matter for equalizing pay across the board. Same thing with raising the minimum wage. Women are disproportionately affected and comprise a significant majority of people who hold minimum wage jobs. So if we're talking about elevating women across the board and narrowing that pay gap, then we need to raise the minimum wage. I think it's one of those things where it's all of these factors kind of intertwine. It's not a single policy answer, but it has to be an entire agenda that's pushing us forward. So that's one. Obviously the battle for our bodies is around our own autonomy. It's whether it's the ability to have an abortion, or to get birth control, or to make decisions for ourselves, and even to have access to healthcare. Basic access to healthcare has an even bigger impact financially and in terms of our health on women than it does on men, just at equal ages and other variables. So that's one of the reasons that I'm so big on Medicare for all. If we can't get basic healthcare, then we're never going to be able to achieve financial stability and be able to kind of move forward in our desire to achieve equality.
So I want to ask you, because you brought up Medicare for all, and it's one of my favorite subjects. There are a lot of people that say that you can't run in a swing district and run on progressive ideas, and that ideas like Medicare for all or Green New Deal are just, they're for good progressive districts like mine and not necessarily swing districts. What do you say to that?
Well, you probably, those who are watching and not just listening probably saw me roll my eyes, because I got so tired of that argument too. The fact is, most people, they may not understand what Medicare for all means. But it's been used as kind of this terrifying concept of like, oh, the socialists are going to take away your health care. If you go around and ask most people if they like their health care, the overwhelming answer is no. The overwhelming answer is that people have to make terrible decisions about their health to, just to be able to afford it. I was visiting with my aunt the other day. She has type 1 diabetes, and she was telling me that she was literally she was going into diabetic shock, and was coming down from this really isolated place. She was wrangling cows, and she basically had to choose to drive past the hospital that was closest, because she knew that her insurance wasn't going to pay for it at that hospital. So she had to go to another one that was like an hour further along. By the time she got into the hospital, she was practically in a coma. And she was hospitalized for days and days instead of, something that could have been pretty easily resolved. But that she rations out her supplies. She doesn't get tested as often as she should. She doesn't change her pump as often as she should, because it's so expensive. And so I don't think that Medicare for all is a controversial thing anymore, and the polling backs us up on that. And So if you just have a real conversation with people and you're like, look, do you really like your health insurance? Like, are you really feeling like you're going to lose something out of this? And I think most people are reasonable. You just can't let it be used as a, a dog whistle.
And in fact, a lot of your districts in Orange County that were Republican seats that Democrats claimed were claimed by people who ran on Medicare for All, right? Kate Porter, Josh Harder, Mike Levin, a number of others. You have a phrase in your book, you say, why do elected officials too often stand up for corporations instead of workers and families? What's the answer?
Money. It's always about money. And that's why one of the first things that I say should be part of a feminist agenda is to get rid of or majorly limit the influence of big money in politics. And when we have so many people, historically it's been on both sides of the aisle, but now it's overwhelmingly on the Republican side of the aisle, that are literally dependent on money from corporations to be able to stay in their seats. That's why, districts that no longer are even remotely representative or reflected by their representatives, those incumbents are able to stay in place because of the money that's coming from big oil or from, whatever other major corporations are there, and know that the Republicans, namely, are going to back their interests. So I don't think you can have real reforms on almost anything, whether it's health insurance or pharmaceutical costs or anything, environmental issues, Green New Deal. That's not popular because guess who doesn't want it to be? And that's who's influencing the decision making. So we pass HR 1 and that'll make a huge difference for women as well as everybody else.
Well, I think I was one of the first candidates to run for Congress, refusing to accept corporate PAC money. And I think by the time you came along, there were several of you, and to me that makes a big difference. And today I think we've made
even
that
more.
Made
and
that.
And the new class, the class of 2020 that's coming in, it's going to be real hard to be a freshman and take corporate PAC money at this point. Yeah,
that's right. I want to get to sort of, because I want to make sure we have some time for audience questions if we have them. And so I want to just talk about current politics a little bit. And specifically the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett, and ask you, what does that nomination say about Trump and the right's views on feminism and women? Can you talk about the stakes of the Supreme Court and the election? I think everyone in my district certainly has a very clear view on this, but I would love to hear your thoughts.
Well, I think that they are pointedly choosing a woman because they want to make the argument that we aren't supporting women, that we're being hypocritical by saying, well, they're choosing a woman as a Supreme Court justice, you need to support her. And that's just not how it works. We're not here to support people who are misogynist, whether they're men or women. And we need people who are going to fight for and who value the issues that matter for all of us. And I think that this nominee and any other that is provided by the list or provided on the list of evangelical supported justice contenders is ever going to be able to reflect those values that are so important for us. So the stakes are huge. Unfortunately, I think we're pretty limited on our options to do anything about it before the election. The election is when it's going to count in terms of if we win big enough, then even no matter how much he's stacked the Supreme Court, then they're not going to be able to overturn the results of the election. But if we win by a narrow margin and it comes down to just a couple of states, that Supreme Court could really decide if Trump has another term or not. And that's terrifying. If we win the Senate, then we have the option of possibly expanding the court. We don't have that option if we don't. So I think that this is, just another example of why November is so important and how we cannot let up. And the fact that we've let up before is what's led us to this point where, we have so far to go in terms of control of the, not even control, but just, real reflection of democratic values in the judiciary.
Yeah, as you know, I'm the co-chair of the Progressive Caucus, and we had our weekly Progressive Caucus call today. and we had Senator Schumer on the call and former Attorney General Eric Holder talking about court reform and the need for court reform in whatever new administration, new Congress we have. And I think, you know, all I would say to everybody watching is we do have power. It's called the vote. Mm-hmm. And nobody can take that away from us. And if we can do everything in our power between now and Election Day to vote, to get other people to vote early, that is the expression of our power. And so I hope that people, I have an effort going on. We've adopted Pennsylvania with our volunteers. We train people. Anybody who's interested can email Tash, Tash, at PramilaForCongress.com, and we'll train you. We'll get you working. We've made over 50,000 phone calls in just 10 days, both here in Washington State, but also in Pennsylvania. And I just think that we cannot leave anything on the table.
One of the things that I think is often underrated, or people don't really consider doing themselves, you know, a lot of people are like, oh, I don't want to make phone calls to strangers, but there is so much power in making a phone call to the people that you know, that you might have not talked to in a little bit or haven't talked about with politics. But women, especially within our network, we are going to be the most powerful voting bloc of this entire election. I guarantee it. And, you know, I'm just thinking about like my cousins, or specifically, I've been having conversations with my cousins, or, you know, girls, women that I grew up with, but who aren't necessarily politically active, but hey, you know, I'm really worried about this election. Have you thought about it at all? And they're like, oh yeah, everything's terrible, but like my vote doesn't matter. Then you have a real conversation of like, no, actually your vote does this time. And here's why. And, you know, do you have a plan on how you're going to vote? Have you registered? Have you changed your address? Are you going to, you know, vote by mail? Do you know where your polling place is? Do you know if it's even going to exist anymore? Because the one that you went to 4 years ago probably doesn't. So that just personal network activation is massive and needs to be fully tapped out.
One of the things that people often say to me is, I don't know that my vote matters, and you know, I don't think that there's a difference. I don't like Trump, but I also don't love Joe Biden. And I have been working recently on this issue of forced sterilizations and unnecessary medical procedures that have been happening in Irwin County Detention Center in Georgia. Mm-hmm. We just came back from a CODEL, and tomorrow we will be able to put a resolution on the floor condemning those practices and calling for no woman that was subjected to those practices to be deported, and making sure that we preserve the evidence. And we went to the detention center this weekend, and Katie, it was chilling, you know, these women that we met with there, and we each met with, there were 10 members of Congress, and we each met with a group of women, 6 to 8 women. In my group, there were 4 out of the 6 that had these unnecessary medical procedures, including this doctor putting his hand physically into the woman's vagina with no lubrication, no explanation, laparoscopies, DNCs, you know, ultrasounds, invasive procedures. In the worst of cases, the woman is put under, and she wakes up and she's undergone a hysterectomy or had a fallopian tube removed. And there was just so much, as I was, you know, thinking about this in relation to your book, that is about how men, mostly men, devalue women's lives, and particularly those women who are most vulnerable.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to ask you to reflect on that, and how hard it is sometimes in Congress to move even an issue that feels so real. It is real, but there are all kinds of political considerations around it, whether it's around abortion or whether it's around immigration.
Yeah.
And you know, how you think we best tackle that. I'll say that the good news here is the resolution is going to be on the floor. We have 225 Democratic co-sponsors, and I'm so proud of our caucus for stepping up. But your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it is yet another example of how, I mean, the fact that it's even a question of whether there should be consent, that it's just immediately taken away from them. You know, I think you have a horribly dangerous and tragic combination of a vulnerable community that are these women who have crossed the border in the most desperate of circumstances, who also don't speak English in many cases, and who are in these detention centers that are horrifying. And on top of that, they're women, and so they're basically the most vulnerable to any kind of you know, I don't know, any kind of victimization whatsoever. So I think that we just see that over and over again. We see it with women's bodies being degraded, whether it's people yelling on the street, or if it's people who grope thinking that they don't need to, you know, the woman doesn't have a say in who's touching her body. The fact that we've got revenge porn, or the cyber exploitation that I've dealt with. And, you know, I don't think that truly fundamentally changes until we have equal representation, and until women are the ones who are in power in every institution, who are making the decisions, and who are saying that we are on the same level, and that we need to have the same kind of respect.
Did you find a real difference in how male reporters responded to your whole experience, and how women reporters responded? And I ask that in part because there was a real difference in this Georgia. When I introduced the resolution and was talking to reporters, there were male reporters who said, but they weren't all sterilized, right? As in, you know, if you got a fallopian tube removed without your knowing, somehow that was okay because you weren't fully sterilized. Where a woman a woman reporter never said that to me. Did you experience that difference?
I think I experienced that actually more when the question of domestic abuse came up, where it was, well, you know, he didn't hit you, did he? Or you know, or something to that effect, where it was basically like diminishing the emotional aspects of it. And you know, I think as far as reporters, the treatment from reporters that I experienced was so based on ideology, right? It was the right-wing reporters that were treating me in one way, and it was everybody else who was treating me in a different way. So I feel grateful in that regard. But yeah, no, when it comes to abuse or to sexual assault, there are just inherent considerations, I think, that women have, and because they've experienced it, and that's where the shared experience and the lived experience comes into play in terms of representation. Yeah.
I know we're going to have some questions, and just for anyone who's watching, you can put your questions into the Q&A. So I'm going to get to that in just a minute here. But I wanted to, you know, I always like to give people something tangible that they can take away. And so I wanted to ask you, what is the most important thing that women can do between now and Election Day?
For me, the biggest thing is exactly what I said. Activate your women's networks. Make sure that your daughters, your moms, your grandmas, your aunts, your cousins, the girl that you sat next to in elementary school, make sure that every single one of them is voting wherever they are now. You're all connected in some way, whether it's through Facebook or Instagram or whoever you've had the phone numbers of that you haven't used in a long time. And if you do that for 10 people, that's going to have just a massive impact. And the studies show, and this is why we do field outreach, because that connection with somebody, even just like that little extra bit of kind of accountability of like, oh, I told so-and-so that I would vote, so I need to vote. Like that makes a huge, huge difference. And people are as much as 6 times more likely to vote if that happens. So I would say do that.
Awesome. Okay, here's the first question from the Q&A, and it looks like it's to both of us, but I'm gonna let you go first. Did you know you wanted to be in politics when you were children?
So I talk about this in the book, but I was always interested in politics, and at one point in preschool, I was my teachers, I guess, said that I was I was nominated or whatever, got an award.
Most likely to be the first woman president, right?
Yes. Yep. And so that was kind of, I guess, in my head to a certain extent, but it just went away, right? Over time, we didn't have a woman president. There were not that many women leaders to look up to in politics. And so I think I just kind of, it just faded away. And so it really wasn't until after Trump got elected that the idea even kind of re-entered my head.
And at that moment when that idea re-entered your head, did you think to yourself, oh, this isn't something I can do or I'm supposed to do? Did people tell you that? What was your experience then?
Yeah, well, I wasn't even, it didn't even cross my mind on my own. Somebody suggested it to me because I was wanting to get involved in flipping the district that had been, that had been my home. I'd spent my whole life in, and that I knew was one of the top key districts in, the whole country for us to be able to take back the House. But the person who was running, who was my primary opponent, I just didn't think could win in the general. He'd lost previously when Hillary Clinton had won the district, and just thought he didn't understand our community. He wasn't going to be able to do it. So I'm complaining about this to many people, including some of my female mentors. And it was one of them who said, Katie, why don't you run? You're the way you're describing this person, like that's you. And then that was my moment of like, well, why not? And here we are.
I think I probably had some similar experiences, and I talk about it in my book that just came out as well. It's called Use the Power You Have, A Brown Woman's Guide to Politics and Political Change. And I never thought I was going to be elected office. I mean, first of all, my dad wanted me to be a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer.
Yeah.
You send your kid across the ocean and that
Right.
they might never come back, and you've got $5,000 in savings that you send them off with. That's what you want them to be. And so the idea of politics was like never to be heard of. Right. And then as an activist for 20 years, I was always fighting the people who were elected office.
Yep, same.
Yeah, exactly. That's why. And plus you were an English major and I was an English major. So
were you? Oh, wow.
Yes.
So very important.
And so it wasn't until I realized that we activists were ceding real political space and an organizing platform to get what we were fighting for on the outside that I ultimately decided to run. So no, if somebody had told me as a kid that I was going to ever run for office, I would have laughed. In fact, probably laughed for 40 years.
Right.
45 years before ever doing that. I wanted to ask, go ahead.
I was just going to say what I've been saying to people is, you never know when that door is going to open or what's going to be behind that door. And you just have to be ready to walk right through it.
That's right. That's beautifully said. You have a new PAC called Her Time. Yeah. Can you talk about your goals and priorities with that PAC?
Yeah. So Her Time is, I started this political action committee out of my re-election funds that I'd already raised. And we've been raising into it since then. But it's really about supporting women, especially young women, women of color, who are to get into leadership positions. It started out at the congressional level, but we've expanded it to include state and local races, and with the recognition that we're going to have to build a bench if we really want to get to parity. We're not going to just be able to support women in congressional races. That's not enough. We need to do it up and down the ticket. We also have kind of, and I'm sure this is something that you've experienced too when you were initially running, getting that first significant support from an organization, having somebody believe in you and show that they're willing to take a chance on you, and that credibility is so necessary. But it's very difficult to get, especially from some of the bigger organizations like Emily's List or like the DCCC or, just the ones that have been around longer and have so many more people to support. So we're about trying to invest early and identify people who have a lot of potential but need an extra boost in the beginning, and hopefully get them on the radars of others. And we've done that really successfully with some of our candidates this year who have gone on to be endorsed by Emily's List and by the DCCC and a number of other organizations. So we're kind of, I see us as sort of seed investors. And so that's one end of it, the electoral support. The other is research. So we're actually trying to figure out what it's going to take to mobilize young women, especially women under 40, as a voting bloc, not just once, not just for this election, but every time at every level of the ballot, and to vote specifically for women. And then finally, the third is that advocacy piece of saying, like, this is the legislative agenda that's going to make a difference. The people that we helped elect, but also everyone else needs to be supporting this.
That's really fabulous. And you've actually supported through your PAC one of the candidates here in Washington State that I'm super excited about, that I'm supporting, Beth Dolio.
Yep.
And you turned me on to a candidate that you're supporting in California, Audrey Denny, who I supported with my PAC. So hopefully
awesome.
if we come together, we can continue to move forward.
That's kind of the magic.
Our women's magic, our feminist magic.
Exactly.
So I think we probably have time for one more question, and there's a question in the chat. Are you both planning on your next book?
Oh gosh.
Oh
well, I've thought about it. I've been thinking about just in terms of what would my next one be? But, I wrote the first one so fast, and I feel like I have some more living I need to do before I write about it. So we'll see, but I don't have a totally formulated idea of any kind yet.
Yeah,
I don't know about
it's
you.
Hard once no, that's how I feel too. I finally got mine done. I got my book contract back in 2013.
Wow. And well, you are a full-time member of Congress. That does make it a little harder.
Well, it wasn't at that time. I was still an activist. I just stepped down from running my organization.
Oh, wow.
And I had this book contract. It was supposed to be a book on immigration.
Really?
Yeah. And then every year something would happen. I ran for the state Senate in 2014, and I said to my publisher, I'm really sorry, I don't think I can get it done until next year. And then the next year I ran for Congress. I'm like, I'm really sorry, I can't get it done. And then of course I got elected to Congress, and Donald Trump was elected, and there was
what? Yeah.
And finally my publisher last year said, Pramila, whatever you write, we will publish. Just get me a book.
Give me something.
And so it ended up being what it was. So maybe there's another one, but it might take another 10 years.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, we are just about out of time, but I actually see that we might have a little bit more time. So let me just ask you one more question. Do you think that you're going to get drawn back into elected office and public service in the future?
I think it's always going to be public service in some way, right? I don't know exactly what shape that's going to take, but I also know I don't want to leave this sphere entirely. I think I learned so much about, how everything works and who should be in power, and the things that need to change, that I can be a pretty powerful voice on the outside, going back to the role of activist, but, more effective one even. I think right now, I was part of the 2018 wave, and you were even before that, but I think we've knocked down a lot of barriers, and we were the first ones to push through in many aspects. But now there are so many others who, because they saw us do it, they know that it's possible. And I don't feel like I need to reinsert myself when there are so many women who should have the opportunity to do so. I want to be able to foster that as much as I can. One day, maybe, like I said, if you got to always know that there might be a door and be ready if there is, but I'm not trying to actively find those doors right now.
Well, Katie Hill, I hope that you continue to bring your wisdom to the world in all the ways that I know you can and you will. And for everybody that is watching, I hope you buy this book, She Will Rise, by Katie Hill. It is a fabulous book. And yes, I think for people who want to learn about what it means to be a woman running for office, what it means to be a woman of color running for office, I think we write these books because we want to inspire other people. We want to help other people to know what they can do and to know what barriers they're going to run up against, and to ultimately recognize that our strength is real and nobody can ever minimize us or talk us down. We are very, very powerful, and most powerful, of course, also with our vote, which is so important in these remaining weeks before we get to the November election. And we have to, especially after watching last night's, I felt like I needed it.
Gosh, I know.
You're massaging your neck.
Yeah, you just feel it immediately right there.
Just massaging our necks, because watching that debate and that train wreck was just so painful. And the reality is that we have to get the most racist, xenophobic, constitution-destroying president out of office, and we need to ditch Mitch and take back the Senate, and we need to expand the number of progressives that are in the House so we can get the policies that you talk about, the feminist manifesto that you have in your in your book.
Yeah, I mean, the bigger the majority, the more we're able to do, right? Like that's the fact.
And elections matter, as you say in the book, and as we say all the time.
And as Trump kindly told us last night, elections have consequences.
Elections have consequences. Was that the only thing that he said that we agree with?
It's got to be.
But, you know, we in Seattle are proud to have been the first major city in the country to pass a $15 minimum wage. Thank you.
I thought you were going to say to be declared as an anarchist organization.
Oh yeah, there's that too. There's that too. On Judiciary Committee yesterday, we had a bill about student borrowers and being able to declare bankruptcy for student borrowers. And within 10 minutes, that discussion had turned to Antifa and Seattle and Portland and Antifa. So yes, we have that as well. But no, we were the first major city to pass a $15 minimum wage.
That's amazing.
I think that the work that you have done in California, the work that we've done in Seattle, leads the way for the rest of the country.
Absolutely.
So Katie Hill, thank you so much for doing this wonderful book talk with us at Third Place Books.
Thank you, Third Place. Thank you so much, Pramila, and miss you. And hopefully I'll see you back in DC soon.
I miss you too, and I know all of our colleagues were sending you a lot of good wishes when I mentioned I was doing this.
Oh, good. So,
thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you again, Congresswoman Jayapal, for being part of this event and moderating our conversation here tonight. And thank you again, Katie Hill. Once again, I have shared the links of where you can buy their books over here in the chat. We do have signed copies available of Katie Hill's books. I want to thank you guys so much for spending your evening here with us. Thank you again to our authors. I'm going to let them have the final word before I end this event. Thank you again.
I'm just saying thank you to everybody. Have a good night.
Yeah, thank you. And if you want to volunteer, please email Tash, T-A-S-H, at pramilaforcongress.com, and she will get you all trained up, put you to work, talking to people in Pennsylvania and here in Washington State and getting them to vote. Let's leave nothing on the table. All right. Have a great night, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Good night. Thank you, guys.